Okay, thanks everyone. All right. So I'm not even fully sure where I ended or got caught off. But basically to say, I did move home. I got pretty established into a good routine, working from home. It was a hard transition because I'm pretty extroverted, so I really thrived on seeing people every day and having those discussions with my peers. And I did need a lot of support in the research world because I still felt like a novice and definitely had lots of that imposter syndrome. So it was always nice to have people kind of along with me for the ride. So whenever I moved and home and then just worked day to day by myself, I did find that a little jarring. Um, but I got in a good groove and was able to make all my meetings with my supervisor virtual, and that all worked out really nice. Um, so then when the pandemic actually hit in March 2020, um, I'll say I wasn't too affected in terms of my PhD work. I was really just kind of working on finalizing my study intervention, which was a website. So a lot of that was just very much independent work, anyways, and kind of just plugging along. But I was working as well as a sessional instructor at UPEI's Faculty of Nursing. And so that was for the moment, we were in person for that whole semester until March 16th, essentially. And that was a real lesson in adaptability and flexibility and like management and leadership, kind of all of that, just helping to guide students as we transitioned. We had to take a pause and then transition to finish out the semester online. Um, and this picture here on this slide is one of the my student group's final presentation. They had to create like a health teaching resource. Sarah, you might remember doing this at UPI, but create a teaching resource for a community agency. And oh, there we go. And this was why it was on stress and coping. And I just remember it being like, oh, the pandemic's here. What is happening? And seeing this slide and having a really good laugh of like, yeah, we're going to be living in this stress cycle for a little while now. Um, but yeah, what was everybody's experience, I guess, when the pandemic hit? If you want to share, do kind of can you even remember back to that month and how things transitioned?
Yeah, I I had to think. It does take a little minute to think about it because it does feel like so long ago now.
Yeah.
But I remember, so that was my last semester of my core courses for my program. Um, and the transition to online it was an adjustment. Not having friends there, like you say, to kind of like talk through things and all of that was challenging. But yeah, made it through.
Made through. Yes,
And
yeah, you did it.
it didn't feel like that long because that was really my last semester of the
Mhm.
core courses. And then I had one more course this past winter, an elective or selective that I took online. And at that time, I was actually very thankful that it was online because it did allow me to kind of like work more.
Mhm.
And it was a course that worked well with online learning. So I was happy about that. So that
Good.
was a plus.
Yeah, great, great. It's amazing how quickly Dow, like everybody transitioned to online so that you could finish out your courses. Because I mean, in that semester, you almost wish like, could the pandemic could have just waited until a few more weeks and well into April, so we could have seen through, I guess, semester and had a clean break. But that's not really how infectious disease and pandemics work, I guess. Awesome, Jamelyn, do you want to share?
Sure. So I think my start date up north was March 7th. of 2020, something like that. So about 3 weeks into my new position is when the pandemic hit. We were quite isolated. I think all of last year, the Northwest Territories only had about 60 cases. So we were lucky in that sense, but on high alert for not bringing it into the smaller communities. But I was up north for the all of the pandemic. So it's helping like develop the policies and procedures for something that we haven't experienced for a long time, to that extent, I guess, being a pandemic. So yeah, it was an adjustment to community health, which was away from any acute care settings that I'd ever worked in, and there was an adjustment with the pandemic changes. But yeah, I think that I had, for me personally, the best experience that I could have with everything going. I can't speak to grad studies, and I'm just starting the program, kind of in the midst of the pandemic. So, but yeah, that was my work experience.
Okay. Did you know that you wanted to pursue like nurse practitioner, or did that kind of come about through this last little bit?
Yeah.
Or that last year working?
I didn't know that that's what I wanted to do. I always knew that I wanted to go up north. At that time, still not too many people were going up north. I feel like everybody has for some amount of time now. But yeah, I had no idea that I wanted to do nurse practitioner. And it wasn't even really nurse practitioner. It was that I wanted to come home and do primary care, which it's a little bit more difficult as an RN down south to do primary care. So I wanted to be doing pretty much exactly what I was doing up there, community health, to the fullest scope that I could down south. So that's kind of when I thought I would do the NP. And here we are.
Awesome. Yeah, you're right. The contextual differences, because you're more isolated working up north in those communities. And so your scope as an RN is very large and wide. And I'm sure the experiences that you had, having to manage and adapt throughout COVID and as the pandemic kind of evolved, creating those policies and all of that, like that probably positioned you even more to be like, okay, now is the time. You want to come home and then also be able to, have the skill and have the scope, the ability to practice kind of to the extent that you wanted to. So, oh, that's awesome. I'll just bear with me. I don't know where my mouse is. Okay, so that was kind of experiences, and thank you all for sharing that too. It's interesting just to hear what, where were you when, kind of, and how did it impact your work, and or whether that be your RN practice or your clinical, your scholarly pursuits too. I just pulled a couple. This is not an extensive literature review by any means, but I pulled a couple articles that have just recently been published about grad students specifically. There is one that follows after this that kind of talks a little bit about nursing students and those being in NP streams as well. So hope that's of interest. But you can see, so this is Christine Rowe is a freelance writer based out of London. And I believe they just did a report, or basically a summary off of a report that was published from a kind of sub-institution with the University of Toronto. That's called the Toronto Science Policy Network. And that network did a survey. They surveyed PhD and master's students across Canada, 45 institutions, I guess, to be specific, in April and May of 2020. And as you can see here from the headline, pandemic harms Canadian graduate students' research and mental health. And student respondents said that they experienced depression, anxiety, and program delays. And we kind of, even with the pandemic, there was so much happening, or so much that really mediated or added on to more stress and uncertainty as the pandemic was happening. We had other factors, whatever your family or your home life situation was, whether or not you had people or to take care of that were in your home life, or maybe you were isolated, living alone, and not really being able to connect socially with other family or friends. There's also the long time overdue critical attention to systemic racism that happened at the same time as the pandemic was unfolding, and the stressors that kind of came to a lot of communities as that was happening as well, and kind of how to manage that on top, and while practicing public health guidelines or aligning with those. And it felt like health and safety and sanity were all being threatened kind of at every corner. And then maintaining employment, or maybe increasing employment too. Sarah, as you mentioned, we were working in the COVID clinics and doing a lot with that. So kind of balancing, I don't know if that was always an expectation to do that much work probably during your graduate studies, but yeah, being able to kind of manage that at the same time as everything was happening. I'll share some stats from this paper, or this report. So they said, and the students that responded to this survey, there was 40% that were in the life sciences, and then 24% physical sciences, and then 21% that were social sciences, humanity. So not specifically health, but kind of aligning in a similar background as us, I guess. And there was about 1,400, just over 1,400 respondents, and about 3/4 of those said that the pandemic notably impacted their ability to conduct research, which certainly makes sense. I feel like it's no surprise, even from myself. I know, a lot of I created a website for my research, and a lot of my activities were all online anyways, but it was still like people's workloads. Your attention had to be focused on other things, so delayed like getting research getting ethics approval, and there was a number of things that were delayed. And best laid plans with timelines don't always they're not going to listen to what's going on in the world. So I kind of aligned with that stat. But then there was another 72% of the respondents said that they experienced worsening mental health as a result of the pandemic, which I believe is accepted or is predicted. Sorry. Yeah. So I won't go, just kind of seeing our time, I won't go too far depth into this study. I'll move on to now the Rosenthal and colleagues listed here, they published in 2020, the summer of 2021, their report on a survey of mental health in graduate nursing students during COVID-19 pandemic. So this study was actually based in Western United States. I'm not sure exactly where, but it did include all graduate nursing students. So there was those who are in the Masters of Science, and then those who are in the NP streams, as well as PhD. So kind of allowed for a nice spread, and something that is more familiar with our experience, that everybody that's here today. And kind of in this article, they do report that, in pre-pandemic times, graduate studies or graduate students, specifically in health-related fields, commonly experience difficult mental health challenges. So, depression, anxiety, increased level of stress, that can all come about whenever you're entering health-related graduate studies. And so, understandably, Rosenthal and colleagues predicted that this would probably only enhance or only grow as the pandemic hit and was impacting people in graduate nursing programs. So they did a study and they surveyed 222 graduate nursing students, and they used 2 instruments. So looking at the depression, anxiety, and stress scale and the impact of events scale, which measures symptoms of PTSD or looks at PTSD. And I'll just touch on a couple of these stats, but they found that 25% of the students express moderate to extremely severe levels of negative emotional states. So that's with that depression anxiety scale. And then 23.8 students scored in an area of clinical concern on the post-traumatic stress disorder scale. So those are, thankfully not the majority of their sample, but still large. And a clinical concern for PTSD is something that you definitely shouldn't be taking for granted. And then they do talk about here in this article, talk about nurses who were working. Maybe they were already working clinically before and balancing this while pursuing graduate studies, or sometimes they were mandated to increase work because the demand was so high. There was such a need for nurses, or some people decreased their clinical work hours so that they could kind of be able to balance and focus on studies. And there were many participants that also had children. And they actually reported that having children, having them home, acted as a silver lining, during this experience. And these authors found that it was a protective factor against the post-traumatic stress symptoms, that they were able to, again, I kind of come from a lens, like I don't have any dependents, so I didn't have any children living with me during the pandemic, but from what they say, it was just being able to focus your attention on family, and even though it was stressful and it was a lot of management, it was, they had that time with their children that maybe they wouldn't have had they been at school or you were elsewhere. So the lockdown those experiences kind of helped with that. Do you think there's anything shocking from those 2 studies at all? I know we didn't really go through it too in depth, but it kind of makes sense, those findings. Yeah. So it's unfortunate, but I think, it was bound to happen, and we can't all, this is something unprecedented times. This is something that no one really expected, except for Bill Gates, apparently, but or really was prepared for happening at this point in our lives. So it's to be expected that it's going to take some time for people to figure out what their schedule needs to look like, and figure out ways to cope that'll kind of be effective with this really novel experience. I just saw this as well too. This was a little older now, but February 2021, and grad school's applications actually increased. This was just basically talking about Western University and the University of Toronto, and more so the programs that they cited in this article were like law, primarily, I think, but then overall between master's and doctoral studies as well, they saw like a significant increase during the pandemic in grad school applications. Similar to Jane Lynn, you're in that boat. One of the director of student services at the Ontario Institute for Studies of Education, this is a quote that's pulled from this article, but they said, we saw right away this was different. We were inundated and we had 30% increase in applications. When the economy goes down, people get worried about their jobs, or they lose their jobs and they think about going back to school. So maybe not such a negative experience in a way. Hopefully those were positive moves for everyone. And although it's a scary time, or uncertain time to get into graduate studies. It could seem like enhancing your knowledge and maybe your skill set as well too, hopefully only will serve you better as once you graduate and get into the workforce again. And this is pretty much the last slide I have, but I don't know, I tend to be an optimist, and even though you were in the fourth wave now, and our chief public health officer has really recommended that there's no essential travel, and things seem to be tightening up more, even though we've been really successful in vaccinations and all that stuff. But kind of even with all that confusing pandemic related aspects, I do think that progress is on the horizon for all of us. We're all in a good groove now and moving forward. And yeah, hopefully this, we're able to meaningfully engage. A lot of opportunities are all online for education or even social, all of that. In a way, it's nice that it's online now. Personally, for me, I can attend a lot of DAO activities and learning activities that I wasn't able to before when I moved back. So I'm selfishly happy about that. But yeah, and hopefully we found the ability to really, balance and prioritize our personal, our familial, and community well-being at the same time as all this. Kind of hopeful. But anybody else want to share any kind of last words about, I don't know, being hopeful, or where you see you'll be at as you as the pandemic hopefully tapers at the same time as you're finishing up graduate studies? That's all right. Awesome. Okay, well, this is my last slide. And maybe this is the slide that I'll talk about how great was it to have pets during this whole experience. I don't know if Tara and Sarah, I don't know if you have any, or if you're even a pet person, but I 100% am, and this is my dog, Harvey. I try and incorporate him in a lot of academic presentations, which is maybe inappropriate, but it was, yeah, he was good support, good. He was often employee of the month, every month working at home. Awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining, and again, bearing with me through the internet connection issues. I definitely jinxed myself somewhere today, but I'm glad we were able to reconnect, and it was really nice meeting everyone too. And I mean, if you're allowed back on the island and you get back on the island sometime soon and want to connect, I'd love to grab a coffee and chat anytime.
Yeah, this was nice to, chat with different people and see what's going on. So yeah, thank you for organizing, Brianna.
Of course. Thank you. Thanks for saying that. Yeah. Thanks for participating too and sharing your experience. It makes me feel good. That's what I was hoping for this session. So that was so appreciated. Good luck with everything.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Take care.